Hello students, let's start the chapter number 2 now on residential status and tax incidence in our direct taxes. The heading of the chapter is residential status and tax incidence. So this chapter is divided into two parts. First part let's call it as a residential status and second part let's call it as a tax incidence. This tax incidence is also known as scope of total income. This tax incidence is also known as scope of total income. Okay, these are the two parts. So first what we will do, first we will determine the residential status, then we see the scope of total income or taxability of the total income of a person which is based on residential status. In this chapter totally we will see little introduction to residential status, then the most important one where almost every exam you find this residential status of individual, then to understand the residential status of HUF, company and every other person, and the last part will be your tax incidence or scope of total income. Okay, so let's directly move on to what is this residential status, why this residential status is important. Okay, in the first chapter, if you people remember, we have studied our chargeability section. What is chargeability? If you people exactly remember, in the chargeability section in direct taxes introduction which I told you, where taxable or total income of a person is purely based on residential status, where all incomes earned by all persons are not taxable at a time, where the taxability of a person on otherwise you can say like this, the taxability of a person is purely based on residential status. So whether a particular income, if it is there, whether it is taxable or not, it is purely based on residential status. So let's see what is this residential status. Now tell me in a common language, what do you mean by residence? We'll simply say that where do you stay? Now this is an Indian Income Tax Act, so the question arises where you are staying. Example, I stay in India, I stay outside India, like that. Based on that we will decide whether you are resident or you are non-resident. In a common parallels also, we will say that you are a NRI. What is the meaning of the word NRI? Non-resident Indian. You are not a resident in India. Like that, from taxation point of view, let's see what is this residential status is all about. Okay, so please understand, residential status is different from citizenship, nationality and religion. We have got nothing to do with your citizenship, nationality and religion. Residential status in India of a person for taxation purposes is based on certain set of rules and regulations. What are the set of rules and regulations is being given in this residential status? Among all those things, as in CA and CMA inter-taxation, the most important part we have is only assessment of individual. So major focus will be on residential status of individual. So now in today's topic, we are going to discuss the residential status of. Let's see that. So look at the intro first. If you see the intro there, the tax incidence of a person depends upon his residential status. So what do you mean by tax incidence? When you are liable to pay tax, on what you are liable to pay tax, on what you are not liable to pay tax, called your tax incidence. That is based on what? Residential status. For instance, where an income accrued to an individual outside India, the taxability depends upon the residential status of individual in India. So if you are earning an income outside India, the taxability of that income earned outside India, in India whether it is taxable or not, it depends upon the residential status. Similarly, when an income is earned by a foreign national in India or outside India, is taxable in India depending on the residential status rather than his citizenship. So we are not worried about your citizenship, we are worried about your residential status. Therefore, the determination of residential status of a person is very significant in order to find out his tax liability, because the tax liability is found out based on total income. Total income is determined based on your residential status. The total income of a person cannot be computed unless we know the residential status of a person or SSE during the previous year, or as the tax incidence varies according to the residential status of an SSE in the previous year. It is very important to determine the residential status of various persons. So what law says is that before you determine whether a person income is taxable or not, first you need to determine the residential status of that person. That is what the outflow or the conclusion from this para that we have read. So what can be the residential status of any person that you have? Now see here. The residential status of any person can be broadly categorized into two types. First, a person can be resident in India or a person can be non-resident. So the first category in the residential status is either you will be resident in India or you will be non-resident in India. Once a person is resident, he is further classified as resident and ordinary resident, which we shortly call as R and OR, where resident but not ordinary resident, which we call it as RBNOR, and non-resident is NR. So overallly, if you have a person, that person residential status max to max can be 3: resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. Okay, so resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. This is the max to max statuses that we have. In chapter number 1, we have seen the definition of person. The definition of person as per section 2 subsection 31. How many categories of persons we had? Individual, HUF, partnership firm, joint stock company, AOP or BOI, AJP, local authority. So totally how many categories of persons we have? 7. First 2 categories of persons, individual and HUF, will have all the 3 types of statuses: resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. Whereas when it comes to the rest of the 5 persons, they will have only 2 types of statuses. Either they will be resident or they will be non-resident. They don't have a further classification of resident and ordinary, resident but not. Okay, na? So for these persons, we need to check only the residential status, and this residential status will be checked for every previous. Once you are a resident, doesn't mean that for lifetime you will be resident. Once you are resident, in the next year you can be non-resident also. Okay, and we have got nothing to do, as I told you, with nationality, your citizenship. Sometimes of course we will see what is citizenship also, that's a different story, and we have nothing to do with your religion. So please remember, these 3 items are not required for us to determine the residential status of a person or to find out whether the income is taxable or not taxable. Clear? So let's go through the notes there. So the residential status of an SSE can be of 2 types, either resident in India or non-resident in India. However, a resident individual is further classified as resident and ordinary resident but not ordinary. Therefore, individual and HUF can be resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary, non-resident, all the 3. So individual and resident can be all the 3. Whereas all other SSEs, firm, AOP, joint stock companies, every other person can be either resident in India or non-resident. So these every other persons will have only. Clear? Now, some basic rules you need to understand before we proceed with the provisions of residential status. Just check there. Residential status is determined for each categories of persons separately. Ante what rules we have for individual, it is not same for HUF. What we have for HUF, not for firm. Like that, every person has got different things. Residential status always determined for the previous year. As I told you here, It is determined for the every previous year, and your residential status can change from year to year. It need not be the same. Residential status of a person is determined for every previous year because it may change from year to year. If a person is resident in India in the previous year relevant to the respective assessment year, any source of income, he shall be deemed to be resident in India in the previous year relevant to the assessment year in respect of each of his source of income. Ante for every source of income we don't determine. Once for a particular income you determine his residential status, he is a resident for all the source of income. And a person resident for more than one country is possible. Citizenship of a country and residential status are separate concepts. This is what you need to note. It is a duty of the assessee to place all relevant facts before the assessing officer to enable him to determine the correct residential status. So first of all, you should know your residential status. If you don't know your residential status, you should place before the officer all the documents to prove your residential status. Am I clear? So let's try to understand how to determine the residential status. Among all persons, the residential status of individual is the most important one. Almost all in every exam, pakka you will get a question on residential status. That too specifically he will ask on individual. Okay, so let's go further and check what is the residential status of individual. How do you determine that residential status of? Okay, chalo start. Section 6 subsection 1 talks about residential status of an individual. As I told you, individual and HUF can have both resident and non-resident. Resident is further classified as resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary. Overall, three types of status. So an individual can be either resident in India or he can be non-resident in India. An individual who is resident in India is further classified as resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident. What we will do for tax purposes, for better understanding purposes, this part let's call it as step 1, and this part let's call it as step 2. Okay, in step 1 we'll determine whether a person is a resident or non-resident. In step 2 we'll determine once a person is a resident, he is a resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary. In step 1, if a person is non-resident, his status ends there. That itself is his status. Okay, so for step 1 we have something called, basic conditions. What are basic conditions? Two basic conditions we have. Basic condition A, it says that an individual should be in India at least for a period of 182 days or more in the current previous year. As for the first chapter that we have studied, what is the current previous year for us? 24-25. So when I check from 1st April 24 to 31st March 25, in that 365 days, 182 days minimum you should be in India. So your presence in India determines your residential status. Your stay in India determines the residential status. Or if not that, B condition. An individual should be in India at least for a period of 60 days or more in the current previous year, that is 24-25. And B is not only 60, and 365 days or more in 4 years preceding the current previous year. What is current previous year for us? 24-25. Leave that. Go back for how many years? 4 years you see. That is 23-24, 22-23, 21-22, 20-21. In this 4 years when I check, you should be there 365 days put together. 365 days not in every year. 4 years put together you should be there 365. So when you satisfy this 60 and 365, then the B condition is satisfied. So for A condition, I need only current year data. For B condition, I need current year data and 4 years data. Total 5 years data is required. So to check the basic conditions, You need total 5 years data. Without 5 years data, you cannot check the total condition. Clear? So, once if in this A, either basic condition A or B or both A and B is satisfied, then it is resident. If you have not satisfied A, you are not satisfied B, you are non-resident. Okay. In these two, any one condition should be satisfied to become a resident. If both the conditions are not satisfied, you will become a, once you are non-resident, your story ends there. Once you are resident, as per this step, and either A condition or B condition or both are satisfied, then there comes step 2. In step 2, we have got something called additional conditions. What are additional conditions? Again, we have two types of additional conditions. Additional condition 1 says an individual should be in India, a resident in 2 years out of 10 years preceding the current previous year. Ante 20, 24, 25 is the current previous year, go back for 10 years. In the 10 years, 2 years you should be what? Resident. Now tell me how a person will become resident. A person will become resident if he satisfies either basic condition A or B or both. Okay. So what I should do to check that? You take a year like 23, 24. Check basic conditions A or B or both or none. Based on that, you say whether he is resident or non-resident. Like that. Follow for 22, 23, 21, 22. Like that, you do it for how many years? 10 years. When you check like that for 10 years, in that at least for 2 years, he should be resident. People read this condition as wrong. How they will read, 2 years you should be resident in India. Did I say that? You should not be 2 years in India. 2 years you should be resident in India. How you will become resident? In a particular year, if I am there 182 days, that is enough. I will become resident because A condition will be satisfied. If not A condition, B condition you satisfy. Like that you can become a resident. It doesn't mean that 365 days you should be in India. Wrong. Clear? Then coming to the second one, second additional condition says an individual should be in India at least for a period of 730 days or more in 7 years preceding the current previous year. And 24, 25 is the current previous year, leave it. 23, 24, 22, 23, 21, 22, 20, 21, 4 years. 19, 20, 18, 19, 17, 18, 7 years. In this 7 years total, you should be in India at least for a period of 730 days. Then your second condition is satisfied. So first condition says where you should be in India at least resident in 2 years. Out of 2 years you should be resident in India out of 10 years. Second condition says you should be in India at least for a period of 730 days or more in 7 years preceding the current previous year. So total how many years data you require? Current year data plus 10 years plus 7 years. So this 7 years is covered in this 10 years. Total minimum 11 years is required. Okay. But in the last year, if you want to check B condition, another 4 years. Total 11 years plus 4 years. 15 years data you require to completely check the complete residential status of a person. Because in the last year, if you want to check his residential status, B condition 60, 365. Total 4 years data more you require. Okay, total 15 years. So on what basis he is resident, what basis he is non-resident. Finished. That is A and B. Further classification of resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary is purely based on additional conditions 1 and 2. He has satisfied at a time. Additional conditions of 1 and 2 he has satisfied at a time, resident and ordinary. Additional condition 1 is satisfied, 2 is not satisfied. 1 is satisfied, 2 is not satisfied. He is what? Resident but not ordinary resident. Additional condition 1 is not satisfied and 2 is satisfied. He will become resident but not ordinary resident. additional condition 1 is not satisfied and additional condition 2 is also not satisfied. Ante none of the conditions are satisfied, then you will be resident but not ordinary resident. So when both conditions are satisfied, then only you are resident and ordinary. If one condition is satisfied, none conditions are satisfied, you are resident but not ordinary. Okay, so you have basic conditions, you have additional conditions. So if you look at the summary of residential status of individual, okay, it is like this: status, basic conditions, additional conditions. Say resident and ordinary resident. Basic condition A, B or both. Additional conditions 1 and 2 at a time. Resident but not ordinary resident. Basic condition A, B or both. Additional condition 1 or 2 or none. Non-resident, none, none. So you can say this as a summary of residential status of an. Okay, so this is what is residential status of a, where we have based on, if you observe the entire thing, it is purely based on the period of stay in India, and how long you have been in India. Just go through the notes there. Residential status of an individual. An individual can be either resident or he can be non. Resident is further classified as resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary. Let's use the short forms there: resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non. Okay. First, resident individual. An individual is said to be resident if he satisfies any of the basic conditions A or B or both A and B. Non-resident individual. An individual is said to be non-resident if he doesn't satisfy both the basic conditions A and B. He has not satisfied A, he has not satisfied B. Resident and ordinary resident. An individual is said to be resident and ordinary resident only if the individual is resident first. So how a person will become resident? He has to satisfy either A or B or both, and satisfies both the additional conditions 1 and 2 at a time. Both the additional conditions 1 and 2 at a time he has satisfied. Then he will become resident and ordinary resident. Next, resident but not ordinary resident. An individual is said to be resident but ordinary resident only if first he should be resident, then and satisfies any one or none of the additional conditions 1 and 2. Any one condition is satisfied or none of the additional conditions 1 and 2 are satisfied, then you are resident but not ordinary resident. What are basic conditions? Basic condition says he should be in India at least for a period of 182 days or more in the current previous year. What is the current previous year? I told you 24-25. He is in India at least for a period of 60 days or more in the current previous year, again 24-25, and 365 days or more in 4 years preceding the current previous year, leaving the current year 4 years backward. Additional conditions: is resident A or B at least in 2 years out of 10 years preceding the current previous year. Then he is in India for 730 days in 7 years relevant to the current previous year. Clear? So this is what is your residential status of a individual, basic conditions, additional. Okay. Some important notes which we have, which we need to understand there. What are those? First one. Note 1. It is not essential that the stay should be at the same place. Now, if you observe all the conditions, it is like this. Here you see what is said. You should be in India. You should be in India. Here you should be in India. Here you should be in India. So the question arises, where in India? What is the definition of India? If you remember the first chapter, in that we have learned the definition. India includes landmass, territorial waters, and the airspace above landmass and territorial waters. So where I should stay? From Jammu and Kashmir to Kanyakumari, Gujarat to West Bengal, where I should stay? Anywhere you can. There is no problem. And you need not stay at a particular place. And you need not stay in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata or metro cities like Hyderabad. You can stay anywhere in India, but it should be a part of it. It is equally not necessary that the stay should be continuous and the place of stay and the purpose of stay is immaterial. The items of number of days of 182, 60, 365, 730, 2 out of 10 need not be continuous. Broken periods are also accepted. how to count broken periods. If you are in India for 15 days, you went abroad, came back, like that, if that situations arises, what you should do is the date of arrival, date of departure, both will be taken into consideration. And all that broken periods added together of a year to determine your number of days stay in India. Note 2. Where the person is in India only for part of the day, the calculation of physical presence in India in respect of such broken period shall be made on hourly basis. Simple logic to say, in a day how many hours will be there? 24 hours. So if a whole day you are not there, this is little depth. So if the whole day if you are not there, you are there for some of the hours, then count that all the broken hours if the data is available. If data is not available, the date of arrival, date of departure can be taken. If the data is available, then take it. If data is not available, date of arrival, date of departure, both we are going to add. A total of 24 hours day spread over the number of days to be counted as being equivalent to a single day. If the number of hours is given, if it is not given, time is not given, then date of arrival plus date of departure, both will be taken into consideration. Am I clear? However, if the data is not available, the calculation of stay in India in terms of hours, then the day he enters into India as well as the day he leaves India, both shall be taken into account. A stay by an individual on a yacht moved in a territorial waters of India would be treated as presence in India, because territorial waters is also part of India. And how many nautical miles it is? Up to 12 nautical miles. You remember the introduction definition which I told you? From the baseline up to 12 nautical miles it is India. Then there is another special provision which has come up, which is called as a deemed resident. What is the meaning of the word deemed resident? As per section 6 subsection 1a, a person is said to be deemed resident only if the conditions. That person should be Indian citizen. I told you, in the introduction, we don't worry about citizenship, but there are certain cases where citizenship is also counted. So we need to check about that Indian citizen. Second, his total income must exceed 15 lakhs. That too, which income? Indian income. And excluding the foreign income, his total income must exceed 15 lakhs. Then he is not liable to tax in any other country or territory by reason of his domicile or residence or any other similar criteria. So he is not at all liable to pay tax in any other country. If you are not liable to pay tax in any other country where you have an Indian income exceeding 15 lakhs, we don't check basic conditions, we don't check additional conditions. Nothing will be checked. Without that, you are deemed as resident. There are n number of areas in tax where department wants to bring into you into the taxation purview. What department simply do? They say that you are resident in India, rather deemed resident in India. What is the meaning of the word deemed resident? You are not as per the rules, but still I want to bring you into the loop to tax it. So I use this word called deeming. What is deeming? Assuming. I am going to assume that you are resident in India if that conditions are satisfied. And in all the deeming provisions also, department is 100% justified in calculating you as a deemed resident, deemed person, deemed SSC. All these cases are very genuine cases where department wants to tax you, then they will make. So in this case also, if you see, he is an Indian citizen, he has an income more than 15 lakhs, he is not liable to tax in any other country. So the logic of the government is very simple. No one is taxing you in the world, and in India you are an Indian citizen and your income is more than 15 lakhs. Why I should leave you? Simple, I'll tax it. So to tax first you should become a resident. So I am deeming you as a resident. So this is what is the provision of deeming. Then one more last concept is there in this residential status of an individual, which is known as exceptions to basic conditions. There is the last concept which is there in residential status of an individual, that is exceptions to basic conditions. What is the meaning of the word exceptions to basic conditions? You know that an individual is said to be resident in India or is a non-resident in India. An individual is said to be either resident in India or is said to be non-resident in India. On what basis you are saying this? A person is said to be resident or non-resident in India based on what? Basic conditions. How many basic conditions we have? A or B. If he satisfied A or B or both, you are resident. You have not satisfied A, you have not satisfied B, you are non-resident. But in exceptional cases, what happens, you know, only basic condition A is applicable, B is not applicable. In the following cases that we are going to see, only basic condition A is applicable, B is not at all. What are those cases? First one, any person who is leaving India as a crew member of an Indian. Who is a crew member of an Indian ship? Who works on board of the ship is called as a crew member. You go on a tour outside India, world tour, some country tour, etc., and you come back again. You are called as a crew, anyone who works on the ship. So you are going to leave India. Second, any person, individual who is an Indian citizen, who is leaving India for employment outside India. Again, here also if you see, you are leaving India. What is the purpose? For employment outside India. Employment is of two types. It is self-employed or it is normal employment which you have. Normal employment which you have, that is called as an employment. Self-employed you may have, normal employment. Okay, these are the two types that you have. In these two cases, it is leaving India. And third case, an Indian citizen or person of Indian origin who stays outside India but wants to visit the current previous. So these two cases are leaving India and this case visiting. So in these three cases, we have got a person to check his residential status. We check only basic condition A, but we don't check basic condition. Clear? But in the third case, here they have given a special B condition. What is that special B condition? Special B condition means, for him, the special B condition is, in the current previous year, he should be in India for 120 days or more the current previous year and 365 days or more in 4 years preceding the current previous year. 365 days or more in 4 years preceding the current previous. Which is what? The special B condition. But his total income in India exceed tax, like how we have in case of your deemed resident case, and he should be again an Indian citizen or Indian origin, anyone you can. Okay, so these are the three cases that you have which are known as exceptions to. So overall, if you see section 6 subsection 1, residential status of an individual, what all we have seen? First, how to determine residential status of an. In that we have seen what are his basic conditions, what are his additional conditions, what are exceptions. On what basis he will become resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. This is what we have seen. Second, deemed resident concept that we have seen as per section 6, subsection is as per section 6 subsection. This is all overall summary of residential of. Okay, now as we have seen the residential status of individual, let's move on to the other person's residential status. But remember one point as far as CA and CMA inter tax is concerned, as we have only assessment of individual, more stress is given on residential status of individual, very less limited stress is given on HUF and other. So let's quickly go through how to determine the residential status of every other person. Okay. Now in respect of individual, he is a natural person, so you can say stay in India, stay outside India. The base was period of stay. To understand, the residential status of individual was determined based on the number of days of stay in India. How about the residential status of other persons? Other person is not a natural person like individual. So on what basis you are going to determine the residential status of other persons is the question. Okay, it is like this. Section 6 subsection 2 talks about residential status of a HUF. HUF is not like an individual. HUF is an artificial person which is created by the process of, so little different we have. As individual, HUF can also be either resident or they can be non-resident. The residential status of HUF, it depends upon if control and management of a HUF is 100% in India or partly in India and partly outside India. So HUF is not a natural person like you and me, so we don't use the period of stay in India. It's an artificial person, so we use control and management. If that control and management is 100% in India or partly in India and partly outside India, based on that we say whether is a resident. If control and management of a HUF is 100% outside India, then an HUF is known as your. So the residential status of a HUF is purely based on what? Control and management. What is control and management? Who will have control and management? Control and management means it is a decision making power. The decision making power in respect of what? It is not day-to-day affairs, day-to-day affairs of the business. It is a investment decisions, income decisions, like that the core decisions of the organization or the formation HUF, where who will have that? As per the law, Karta will have that power. Who is the Karta? Eldest male member of the family can become Karta. Okay. So this Karta as per law will have that control and management power. But taxation said, I don't want a default Karta. And by default, you are a Karta by law. That is not important for me. Who is the real Karta? And who has that control and management? Now, what do you mean by this, sir? Let's assume my Karta is 120 not out, still batting. And he is there on the bed. Okay. He simply can't see. He simply can't hear. He can't take any decisions. Now tell me, wo Karta kya karta? Kuch nahi karta. So it is only for a namesake he is a Karta. Department has given a clarity, I don't want that Karta. Then who you want? Department simply said, Karta should be a such person who really has that control line management. It can be the next person, next eldest male member can be the Karta. He may not be a Karta as per the law. Is he really managing or not is important for us. That fellow, where he has that control line, that is important. If he is taking the decisions in India, resident, full or part. If he is taking all the decisions outside India, then he is a non-resident. Full logic. Clear? So Karta power, control and management determines the residential status of HUF. Once a HUF is a resident, this resident HUF is further classified as resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary. Okay. The second part of that is purely based on Karta. Okay. So if Karta satisfies both additional conditions 1 and 2, then it is known as resident and ordinary. Who has to satisfy? Karta. Karta satisfies both, then status will be whose? HAF. If Karta satisfies any one, either 1 or 2 or none of the additional conditions 1 and 2, then HAF will become resident but not ordinary. So please remember, the second part is purely based on Karta. If Karta is resident and resident but not ordinary, HAF is also resident but not ordinary. If Karta is resident and ordinary, HAF is also resident and ordinary. But the first part is also based on Karta, but it is not based on his status, it is based on control line. Understood? Just go through there. Residential status of Hindu undivided family, HAF, section 6, subsection 2. When a HAF is resident, HAF is said to be resident in India in the previous year only if the control and management of HAF wholly ante meaning enti 100% or partly in India, partly outside India, then you are. When you are non-resident, HAF is said to be non-resident in India during the previous year only if control and management of HAF is wholly outside India, ante 100% it is outside India, then you are said to be non-resident. When you are resident and ordinary resident, HAF is said to be resident and ordinary resident in India only if the manager Karta satisfies both the additional conditions. Who has to satisfy? The manager Karta has to satisfy both the additional conditions 1 and resident but not ordinary resident. A HAF is said to be resident but not ordinary resident in India only if the manager Karta, again Karta satisfies any one or none of the additional conditions 1 and 2. What is your residential status of? In order to determine, note 1, in order to determine the residential status of HAF, is a resident non-resident, the residential status of Karta of the family during the previous year is not relevant. Whereas residential status of Karta is considered while determining the residential status whether they are ordinary or not. Okay. Then they have defined, we have given a definition of the word, what is control line management, you can go through that, control line management. Then next, section 6 subsection 3 talks about residential status of a company. Okay, the third most important person is residential status of a company. I told you in the introduction of residential status that only individual and HAF will have 3 types of statuses. Resident. Resident is further classified as resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary. From rest of that 2 persons, if you leave, rest of the persons you see, they will have only 2 statuses. Either they will be resident or they will be non-resident. How that goes? It is like this. We have a company. Companies are of 2 types, Indian company, foreign company. For Indian company, they are always residents. There is no question of non-residency for Indian company. Okay. When it comes to a foreign company can be resident or non-resident in India. Like I told you, for every person you need to have a base. In case of individual, the base is your period of stay in India. In case of HAF, your base was your control line management. Like that for a company also, we used to have control line management, but that has been recently renamed as POEM. What is POEM? POEM means place of effective management. Place of effective management. If place of effective management is 100% in India, then you are resident. If 100% outside India or partly in India and partly outside India, then you are non-resident. Okay. So like instead of control and management, place of effective management has been determined. What is place of effective management? You can see here. The place of effective management, POEM, explanation to section 6.3. For this purpose, the place of effective management means the place where the key management and commercial decisions that are necessary for the conduct of the business of an entity as a whole are in substance made. And again I am saying, like how I told you control and management of HAF, I don't want day-to-day decisions that you take. the key management decisions which are important for the business, the main decisions that are important for the business, who is taking, where they are taking, what is the place. Generally, who will take this? Board of directors. Where they take? In their board meeting. Okay, so that is known as your place of effective. For this purpose, the set of guideline principles to be followed for determining the POEM may be issued by the board for the benefit of taxpayers as well as administrators. Then moving to the last one, residential status of firm, association of persons, and rest of all persons will come here. Rest of all persons also, it is like this. It will be same like HEF. Section 6, subsection 2 and 4 talks about this. Residential status of every other person. Who is that every other person? Out of 7 persons, individual, HEF and companies covered. Who is left out? Partnership firm, AOP or BOI, AJP and local authority. For these all 4 persons, the status is same. As I told you, only individual and HEF will have whether they are resident and ordinary, resident but not ordinary and non-resident. Rest of all will have only 2 types of status. Here also, they will be either resident or they will be resident. In case of residents, what they say, same story like HEF. If control and management is 100% in India or partly in India and partly outside India. Partly in India and partly outside India, you are residents. If control and management is 100% outside India, then you are non-resident. If you observe this, this is exactly same like HEF residential. Now, what is control and management? Who will have control and management? In case of partnership firms, any partner can have that control and management. In case of AOP or BOI, that association head will be there. You may call it as a president. AJP, head. Local authority also head. So, for this all organization, who is going to lead? Who is having that decision making power? And where they are making the decisions? That place will determine the residential status. If partly in India, 100% in India, they are resident. Partly outside India, also they are resident. 100% outside India, they are non-resident. So, this is all the residential status of person, you can say, where individual and HEF will have all the 3, resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, non-resident. Rest of all persons will have only 2, resident. So, overall we can conclude that while solving the problems, especially only for individual we will have the problems, there we can say that the income of a person is purely based on whether you are resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident. Okay. In the second part of this chapter, let us learn how this residential status will have an impact on the taxability of a person. Okay. So, this is all the complete theory of your residential status of individual, HEF, company and every other person as per section 6. Thank you.